This is Learning to Dad.
I'm the cool dad. That's my thing.
With Tyler Ross.
What I do have are a very particular set of skills.
I'm going to have fun, and you're going to have fun.
Hello and welcome to Learning to Dad. I'm Tyler Ross, and the guest today is Pastor, Father, the man, Ben Maas. Thank you very much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. This is a treat.
Yeah, my pleasure, certainly. As I was telling you before I hit the record button, everybody that I know that knows you just adores you to death, thinks you're wonderful. So I'm incredibly excited to talk to you and really kind of get to know you better.
Well, thank you. I know you've got some audience under 5, and that's generally where I'm most popular, but it's good to hear that some people over 5 don't think too poorly of me. So
this is my daughter just turned 5 yesterday.
Oh, really?
And,
Nice.
yeah, my son will be 4 in 2 weeks and a day. And so both of my kids attend the school at the church of which you are the rector, is the correct phrase?
That's the title, yeah.
So, tell me about what it is you do there now as rector of the church at St. James in Warrenton.
Okay, well, the rector generally oversees the church, and most churches don't have the kind of activity that we have at St. James. So Monday through Friday at most churches is getting ready for Sunday, looking over the bulletins, meetings about outreach and all the other different kind of things. But at St. James, Monday through Friday is probably the most vibrant time in the week because we have all of our preschool students and our elementary school students. And so not only do I run the affairs of the church, but I also get to sing songs, which, for a tone-deaf guy who's has a social phobia of singing in front of people, those 3 and 4-year-olds have helped me overcome it quite a bit. But for age 2 through 5, I come and I read a story from the Bible, and we sing songs, and we pray, and give birthday blessings, and high fives, and fist bumps, and just teach them that they're loved and lovable, and that God's got big plans for them, and that they can do pretty amazing things. So, and that's about as much as we try to instill in our youngest students. And then we also have our elementary, and I get to come in and lead more appropriate church services. When I was a child growing up in the church, it was about the longest hour and a half of my week, and I think we try everything we could to at least be late so that I could minimize the damage, if not get out of it altogether. And so one of my commitments as a priest is to make it more relatable and to make children feel like they're at home, and ideally even encourage their families to participate. So part of my job at the school is making a service where the children realize that they are full participants, and whether they come from different denominations, unchurched, or even different religions, that they get that universal value that they are made in the image of God, beloved by God, and that they're to take care of one another, and that they have a responsibility as citizens of the world, but also that they're welcome, and that they have a place, and that this is a comfortable place, and it's nice to show up someplace every day and know that you belong fully, and so I try to create that. But formally, it's leading the worship, leading the chapel, and often poking my head around the lunchroom or the playroom. Yeah.
So I love that description of the whole thing, because my second year now as a parent of kids at St. James, and whenever people ask me, how do you like St. James? The canned answer I have is, I drop off my kid. No, well, now my wife's dropping them off. But last year, I drop off my kids every day, knowing that they're going to be loved all day. I can't speak. I mean, I'm plugging St. James now, but I can't speak more highly of my experience for my kids with their teachers. And I'm going to call out Mrs. Cott, Mrs. Anderson, Ms. Courtney.
Those are some phenomenal ones.
Yeah, I've just only met Miss D briefly, but my daughter likes her already, so I can't go on more about that. Yeah. So how did you find yourself in the church? Did you grow up in a religious household, or?
It's somewhat interesting. We were Navy brass, so we moved everywhere about every year, 2 years, and you don't realize what other people have and you don't until you're in that kind of situation where you're looking with a different set of eyes. And so you may not have appreciated that everyone with white hair in the neighborhood knew who you were and knew whose son you were, and your parents probably encouraged you to toe the line because they knew who you were and whose family you came from. But I mean, I was always new to a community, and so I never had any kind of roots. My one set of grandparents lived in Atlanta, the other in Vermont, and we were never anywhere close to either of those states, and so. Church was kind of the place where I could get roots pretty quickly, where people who didn't look like me or weren't my classmates or my classmates' parents cared about me and invested in me. And so like I said at the beginning, church wasn't the most entertaining part of my week, but it eventually I started to realize how much it meant to me, because it gave me a sense of belonging and roots in a place that I might only be for 18 months or at most 3 years. But I wouldn't have said I was particularly religious, that it wasn't necessarily the content as much as the community. But the older I get, the more I realize they're kind of one and the same in some respect, that the love we talk about from the pulpit is the love experienced as a child trying to figure out how to belong in a place they're brand new to. And so when I started thinking about what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I went to UVA and started off wanting to be a doctor, and couple classes and maybe too much fun kept that from being a realistic possibility, and went through about every major known to man, and finished with a psychology degree. And I was thinking I'd like to teach, or maybe I'd like to go back and get a master's in social work, or maybe I'd like to get something in counseling, and started to realize that as a pastor, I do all three. And I started working with the youth group and was looking forward to the weekends. And I had a Monday through Friday job in pharmaceutical sales and then in legal editing. And in both jobs, I was looking forward to the weekend to work with the youth and do things like that, and started to think, maybe that's where I'm being nudged, and so that's sort of how I came into it. So.
Oh, interesting. So it was really after college. It
was.
Were you moving around every couple of years all the way up and through high school?
Through high school. My parents were or my dad, I think, probably had enough seniority and was gracious enough not to move my junior year. I think my junior year, we almost got stationed in Guam. So I wasn't quite sure what Guam would be like as a junior in high school. So. So we stayed 5 years there, but pretty much all the way up and through there. And I got pretty active in my high school youth group in high school. And then when I got to college, I don't think I darkened the door of a church unless that there was a date involved. Yeah. And I was very Episcopalian when somebody else expressed it, but it wasn't until even after college that I started to think, you know what, that's when I felt most grounded and most like myself and most like I was doing and being the person I was supposed to be. So
that's a really cool concept of being grounded and feeling most like yourself. I think to some extent that's part of the exercise for me in this podcast is exploring finding that security. Do you feel like part of your job as Father Ben is to kind of help people ground and to find themselves, be themselves?
Absolutely. I think, especially the work with youth. I think so much, and I feel like in a lot of ways it's better than when I was growing up. I would have bought whatever outfit the person that I thought was cool had. I'd paid 3 times as much for the insignia on it, and I'm sure that's still. I know it's still very much, but it's been reassuring to see youth a little bit more comfortable in being who they are, and but a place where you can step away from whatever high school might be like, whether it's easy or whether it's a Shark Tank. You can come to a place where you can be a goofball. You can act like you're 6 years old, and we do silly games, and we talk about things of substance without worrying about whether when you go deep on something that somebody's judging your innermost thoughts. So it is kind of an important thing, and with the younger children, I think the more secure you are in who you are, the more you know that you have value just because you are who God made you to be. the more you can step out and somehow navigate those difficult middle school years. And even though you're going, parents worry about going from a small pond to a big pond, but if you know who you are, that's the most important thing in whether or not you're going to be able to say, okay, you know what, I'm not swimming that way.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's an important piece of it. Yeah.
Do you think that knowing who you are is like a static thing, or do you think it's kind of ever changing? I can only say for myself, it's constantly changing. And I say one of the great gifts that I have is in the Episcopal Church, we have a 3-year lectionary. It's same as the Catholic Church and Lutheran mainline churches. And so I spend a good bit of my week thinking about these particular readings, and they're always correcting me. They're always recalibrating where I am, and the church as a whole, as a community, reminds me, okay, that this is what's really important. These are the values that really have weight in your life. This is what makes you comfortable in your own clothes, in your own self, and those things that you're fretting over. And that's the periphery, but somehow we seem to focus a little bit more of our time on the periphery, especially when we don't have anything that pulls us back. And that's what I hope the community does for one another. You come on Sunday and it's your touchstone, and so you recalibrate your week, no matter what kind of stresses, no matter how much the political upheaval on television or on your computer is driving you nuts, no matter how much you're grinding your teeth about a coworker or worried about finances. You get to church and you realize this is the core of who I am. This is the core of what matters, and it sets your week. So. I'm getting all over the place in my head because I'm thinking about. I thought about bringing.
You've got
you
your questions in there. Yeah. So
I always have like 25 questions just in case, but I only occasionally reference it. But I kind of isolated this conversation in thinking that I'd be talking to you from your perspective about you've got a 12-year-old or almost 12-year-old girl and a 14-year-old boy, but I failed to really consider that you have this bird's eye view of kids in the form of a community from 2 years old to 12, 11, something like that?
Yeah, depending on when they start school. Yeah, so 9, I think we figured it's 9 years. Seems like a lot, of schooling before you ever actually get into middle school. But from 2 years old all the way through 5th grade, that's 9 years of development. So you see it. From the 2-year-olds when they come in to the 5-year-olds when they come out that may be the biggest leap in development that you see in children in just a couple of years.
And I'm going to kind of redirect some of the conversation I hope to have with you now that I'm thinking about it in this light. Considering the development at that age being so important, I just got to figure out how to really kind of dig us into it because it's such a great perspective you have.
Yeah, it is. And, one of the things I was just listening today to a podcast and it was talking about how hard it is. Directives don't work all that well with kids, and our foundation at the school is around virtues, and it really is about it being lived out. Like me coming in and saying, God wants you to be compassionate, and when you're not compassionate, you're not listening. It has limited effect, but an act of compassion. When and the example in this podcast was, the priest was talking about son breaking his arm, and 3rd grade boy, all interested in being on the playground and playing with his friends, and he's got to sit it out because he can't sweat in the Texas heat, and he's got the cast, and so this buddy of his boy says, I'll sit out with you, and so I guess they were in the library sitting out, but they were way too rambunctious for the library, so they sit in the infirmary every day for an hour a day, and she was saying that's what's going to teach my son about compassion, not necessarily the priest coming in. But if you model it in a lot of ways, so probably the high five to the kid that's looking a little bit discouraged that day probably has a lot more to do with the lesson than the Bible story or me telling them this is how you're supposed to live your life. And I think there's a culture created there that's really neat to see. I mean, I watch, and it's been interesting over the years. Your son always looking for your daughter when he gets into chapel, and and the way that she goes and makes sure to sit next to him, and those little acts, those are going to teach a lot more about how we take care of one another than the lessons from on top. But I do feel like you can create a culture, but the coolest thing is to watch it lived out and really gel inside these young people. So.
And to be another commercial for St. James, the societal pressure, the cultural pressure on the kids all seems so incredibly positive. I think it's incredible. All the kids I know at St. James are great. So I'm going to preemptively ask you a question that I usually wait for later. I'll rephrase it later.
All right.
But of the kids, let's say the kids at St. James particularly, that you see develop from like 2 years old to 11 years old, what are 3 or 4 adjectives or characteristics that you like to see them kind of come out as?
There's a piece when you're comfortable in your own skin, and I don't always see it early on, and there's a place where you get to at 5th grade, and we always sort of find ourselves in my weekly meeting with the head of school talking about where those 5th graders are and getting that sense of it. But there's a peace in one another and in each other that invariably comes. Sometimes it comes halfway through the 5th grade year. Sometimes it comes as they're turning the corner into 5th grade. You see it emerge between the early grades where they look a little shell shocked sometimes at life in general. To or when I first try to get them out of the car in kindergarten, and they're holding on for dear life to the 5th grade when they hop out and give you a high five and say hello as they smile and hop up the stairs, and you think, man, they know where they're going. They have that peace, and that I'm okay. I know who I am. So I look for that in the development, and then my son, I don't know if I would have innately said that kid thinks outside of himself. I think a lot of us are pretty hardwired to. We're hungry, we grab it, whether it's the last one or not. We're kind because we're pretty well conditioned to be kind, but it's sort of a me first kindness, and then to see him develop a sense of empathy and a lens for looking at how other people are relating to any given situation, and to see that develop over the years. And I wish there was a magic formula. Again, I think. You create an incubator, and then you model it. More model than tell. I mean, we do a little bit of both, but it's the modeling that I think really it's the teachers you describe. It's the way they show compassion. It's not that they tell you need to be compassionate, and give them language to express when they don't feel it. When somebody is, instead of that person's mean and that person did this, that person didn't treat me with respect. That person didn't think about my feelings when they did that. Or just giving them a vocabulary to talk about what they expect of others and how they want to treat other people. And so those are a few of the things that I think, over the course of time.
I love that empathy was one of them. I posited to one of my friends recently, I said, Bernie Sanders inspired this idea of paid for college. Instead of paying for college, how about if we pay kids to go to inner city schools or hospitals or broken families and volunteer 6 months, build a generation of empathetic people? I think our world would be firing on all cylinders.
Absolutely. And I tell you a little bit more about the Episcopal Church. It's compared to the national average, is usually above the fray socioeconomically, and Episcopal schools usually, St. James is committed to to be as affordable, but that's a relative term. I mean, a lot of people, anything above free is a stretch for family incomes, but a lot of Episcopal schools are considerably expensive, and I think if it's an Episcopal school, it should focus a decent amount of its emphasis, not just on getting them into the colleges their parents want them to get into, or they're already somewhat separated socioeconomically because of the cost of the school, that a primary focus of that school has to be to create people who have a lens for the needs of the world, who have an awareness of the fact that they may study in a Camelot-like environment, but that's not what the world looks like at large, and an empathy and a sense of mission for the world at large. And so, I think it's our responsibility, especially when we're charging tuition and possibly taking people out of an environment where they'd see other things.
I want to. That's a good opportunity for me to talk about resilience, because it's one of my favorite topics for kids. Because I grew up in a very protective atmosphere, in the sense that I went to private school and I live in a Warrenton, and my kids are doing the same, and I want them to fall down, and I want them to get up themselves. But I feel like to some extent, there are a lot of helicopter parents out there that don't let their kids get into any trouble. Do you have experience on maybe both ends of that spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting evolution in our family. So we when Elliot was born, we lived in downtown Old Town Louisville. There was gunshots down the street, and it was considered by many a pretty rough neighborhood, and we felt a real sense of pride in helping our children to see, but as I took a call at a church that was, that was in a neighborhood that was a little bit farther down the street, still a pretty diverse neighborhood, and we moved there, and it was, a place where they had a pretty full exposure, but less, or at least different than they had downtown, and then we moved here, and that's certainly one of the things that I do think is a growing edge for this community, is that it's a peripheral issue, but I think there's a reason there's not a lot of affordable housing in this area, and it's one I don't think we would really want to admit, but I think our children miss a piece of what our responsibility is as parents and as community leaders to give to our children, and how do we cultivate that? It starts with parents. I think parents really, and that's one of the things that we've sort of committed to, is talking to our children about the world outside of Fauquier County, and when we travel, we going to cities and having conversations about the people sleeping on the side of the buildings, and what they're protesting at another street corner, or just what life looks like in an urban center versus here in Warrenton, and the fact that there's social needs, and that we live in a more diverse town than we necessarily always experience. But it's not easy. That is a growing edge, and as a parent here, there's the comfort and security of your kid can hop on a bike and go to their friend's house on the other side of town, and you feel okay with it, and you're pretty sure they're going to come home at the end of the night, and but there's a piece that I wish was also there too.
Yeah, I've talked to a couple. I mean, just to drive it directly to money. I've talked to one billionaire and a couple of millionaires, multimillionaires on the show, and sometimes, it's like one of the greatest advantages I had was that I didn't have a whole lot, and now one of the biggest disadvantages my kids have is they have a whole lot, and it's a funny thing to think you strive for these things to protect your kids, and then that's what keeps them from becoming tough or resilient or anything.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's my fault. I got a little, we're recording again now, but excuse me. I want to jump back into Louisville. So were you in Louisville when you had your first child?
Yeah, both my children were born in Louisville. Bishop Gulick, who actually is from Fauquier County and now is retired here to Fauquier County. He was in Newport News, and his son and I are best friends. And so when I was thinking about going to seminary, I visited him on my way to my buddy's college graduation, and he's always asking, "What are you going to do with your life?" And I said, "Well, I was thinking about this." And he said, "Well, you could come through my diocese and live in Kentucky." And I said, "Well, that's a deal breaker right there." But we love Louisville.
Yeah.
We were there. He said we might like it, and I was sort of skeptical. I thought I'd stay my 2 years and then move back east, and we stayed almost a decade. So.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So how long were you there? Like at what point in your professional life were your kids born?
So I was ordained in 2003, and Elliot was born in 2005. So about 2 years in, Laura Lee came a little after 2.5 years later in 2007, and then we moved back here in 2013. So and I started 1 year helping out at a church as the assistant, and then from that point on had a church kind of in a pretty neat neighborhood in Louisville that just loved. But we always knew we'd eventually get back east because that's where I'm from, where Anna, my wife's from, and my parents go up and down the East Coast. So at least we were where they had hit us on the way up or down. So what? How did having a kid impact the types of messages that you were delivering? They probably are the subject of a lot more than they'd like. And strangely, not at all why Anna and I are together, but she's the daughter of an Episcopal priest. And, in fact, her dad, when I said I was going to go to seminary, suggested that she might want to look elsewhere. So she was the subject of sermons for her first 20 years, and then and now it's been recycled for another 20. But they definitely inform it, and some of the comments they make, one, because they, like you said, they cut right through it, and so sometimes it may not be the profundity as much as it is the fact that they just cut right straight to the core of it and made you think, yeah, that's kind of what it's all about.
Yeah.
And everybody loves a good story, and they generate a lot of them. But I do think it changes the lens. I've only been a priest in a church where I could be married and have kids, but it definitely informs a good bit of my ministry. Certainly understanding what it's like carting kids from A to B, and how difficult it is to get church on Sunday when you've got all the other things pulling at you, and the anxieties you have as a parent, and certainly, it's a dangerous one because family, parent—they're all loaded words. Not everybody's experience is the same, and sometimes the idea of God as a parent is a pretty damaging one when you need something that heals the abuse or whatever the toxicity is within that family system.
Yeah.
But for me, being a parent, I understand what must be the yearning of God for any of God's children in grief or struggling with anything or hurting or not assuming that God has the best interest. My anxieties around everything I do is to try to help my children, and because I love my children, but I'm sure it doesn't feel that way when they've lost video games for 2 weeks, or when it's more on the constructive side than the just holding them tight and let them know everything's going to be okay. But
funny that discipline can immediately precede the letting them know everything is okay.
Absolutely, and it's hard. It's hard to discipline your child, and you look in their eyes, and every instinct just wants to say, you know what, I have to do this because I want you to be better, and I want you to continue to grow, and that's the primary responsibility I have. But everything around me wants to give you a hug and just say, you know what, never forget that I love you. You're lovable. You're phenomenal. But I'm not going to stop trying to help you grow.
I'm reading what I perceive to be a really great book right now, and it talks about it has a chapter where it talks specifically about raising kids, and I'm reminded of it because he talks about discipline, and my son was hitting me and progressively harder, and like I'm going to say I hit my son, but he's 3 years old. I didn't hit my son.
Exactly.
I just gave him what he gave me.
Yeah, just
and
showing him.
He was immediately upset, and the person that he came to for comfort was me.
Yeah,
and the part of the book that was so fascinating was that parents hold grudges against their kids. Like if we hadn't immediately worked that out. The next time that he misbehaved and I held that grudge against him, he wouldn't understand where that came from. Yeah. And so the idea that your kid can immediately forgive you and that now that the discipline part is over, we're back to normal. We're not carrying it over and it's done now. It was just a fascinating concept to me.
Yeah. I like that. It makes sense though. I mean, the way they're, well, we are wired largely for self-defense. I mean, he needs you a lot more than he needs to carry that grudge. You know, you don't quite have that same dependence, and so he's hardwired to go to what he needs.
Yeah, and I gave him exactly what he needs, and I think it was love and a hug.
Absolutely.
And it feels weird to say that I hit my kid, but I didn't strike my child.
I got you there.
I had somebody on that spanks their kids, and the more I read, in the right context, it seems to make sense to me. I don't know if you have any immediate reaction to that.
We didn't, but I know great parents that have, you know, and I do think in the right context, if they never ever doubt that they can turn that switch and do exactly, you know, as your son did, you know that that the hug is right there when he needs it, and it's done. I mean, I think the most dangerous thing we do is we act out of our raw emotion, you know?
Right?
You know, and you know, my dad, you know, is just strict, admiral in the Navy, you know, but and he spanked, but I mean, he was as calm, you know, he might have been irate earlier, but by the time that came, he was as calm as could be. And I always knew that. I always knew there was no, I need to get my rage out and you know, you're the object of it. You know, that was never, ever.
That's incredibly important for parents to understand that. And the book is 12 Rules for Life, The Antidote to Chaos. The chapter is never let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. I would encourage every parent to read that chapter because it is... it provokes thought and ideas. I don't know if you've ever read that.
No, I need to write it down after this. Though.
It's a fascinating chapter that I'm probably going to reread it half a dozen times. But anyway, I've never spanked it was just that one experience. You know, if your kid pinches you and you pinch them a little harder, they pinch you.
Exactly. You want to show them. You want to show them. Okay, you know, and you're teaching them. I mean, that's the whole purpose. Is
the point.
This is what This is what that feels like, and you know, do you want it done to you?
Punishment. It's teaching.
Absolutely. So.
You talked about kids like cutting to the chase. You know, it's not the profundity of it you said, but they're cutting to the chase. What do you think it is that lets them do that?
Well, you know, I mean, I think it's somewhat they're more impulsive in their all right, I need to be loved right now. So this is what I see. You know, we have so many filters on, and and sometimes we can intuit and see things that they can't because of all those filters that that we've put on over the years. But I think their response is kind of unadulterated, and sometimes all those things that we need to deal with the complexity of the world, we can't just take them off just because we want to see something differently. And so I mean, I do think there's a purity there. I mean, you watch children come to the communion rail, and a lot of the adults they want it to mean something, transformative, and or they're still thinking of the grocery list that they're going to go and pick up on the way there. Whereas, a child just comes in and somebody's going to give them something that they did nothing to earn, and then you see just in their eyes gratitude for a gift that's going to be given to them and put in their hands, and that's tough for us to get that unadulterated, that stripped down. So
it's funny how smart they are.
They are, absolutely.
Yeah, really young ones. Mm-hmm. What was raising a boy and a girl, as a member of as a leader of a church? Yeah,
it's there's a reputation that is probably, reputations have a reason for developing over time, but
Sure.
Called a PK or a preacher's kid, and usually it comes with a eventual rap sheet, and my wife won't hide from the fact that the congregation used to call her Anna Rotten, and she had 5 older brothers that were in trouble. One even may have burned down part of the church on accident, trying to light the Advent wreath to make Christmas come a little more quickly.
Oh goodness!
But there is that, and I think sometimes it's a reaction against the church and the way that everything is black and white. So, I think hopefully one of the graces of being in the Episcopal Church, which is in the whole scheme of things, a pretty progressive and church that understands that life's got a whole lot of gray, and that it's a little bit harder to rebel against than necessarily the very black and white, and you're either on the right side or the wrong side of every issue. But there is that reputation, and so I am always attuned to what it's like. But I've only seen the other side. My daughter went to church today, and hadn't been in a while because we've been on sabbatical, which has been a pretty awesome experience with my kids. I have been with them more in the last 2 months than ever before in their lives. But they've all watched her grow up, and they were commenting on how she's really come into this middle school self, and the way that she carries it, and she has that thing that I talked about early on about being in a community where people have invested in me. And so she's had, I think, a lot more people concerned about her, wanting to see her thrive, wanting to watch her grow, wanting to know more about her than people, shaming her for her mistakes, or encouraging her strongly to toe the line, or I don't think she's felt judgment. I think she's just felt affirmation and belonging, and same, absolute same for my son. It's definitely not a natural thing for my son to talk to adults, but he's, and whenever he's there, they ask him, how baseball's going, how's school going, are you still doing this, are you still interested in that, and kind of forces him to come out of himself a little bit. So.
Talk to me about the role of sports in your kids' life. Do both your kids play sports, or one of them?
They do. They do. And, I will say one of the things that I learned on my sabbatical is that we're both full-time working parents. I'm the one who lives in town, and I see them more. Mm-hmm. But we are almost always moving, either from school quickly to the dinner table, quickly out the door to travel soccer or travel baseball, or basketball in the winter, or maybe golf or swimming in the summer, you name it. But we don't do the sport together all that often. My son, I'll go play catch every now and then, or I'll throw balls for him to hit. My daughter and I will kick the ball around. But I love sports. I love what it's done for them as people. But I'd probably be deluding myself a little bit if I said that it's a lot of participatory parenting.
Yeah.
usually I'm on the sidelines watching them or dropping them off at practice. It gets them. It's one of the great things that we've not had to worry too much about video games because they don't have enough time to play a whole lot of it, and, and they're probably busier than ideally they should be. But it's given them a lot of positive things. But I realized as we're camping together, and this summer was for 30-something days, we went cross-country, coast to coast. They got to pick things they wanted to do.
Cool.
Son, a baseball player, got to go to a Cubs game at Wrigley Stadium,
Awesome.
a Dodgers game at Dodger Stadium. We went hiking, camping. Laura Lee got to see Hollywood and tour of the stars' houses and all that jazz. So, but listening to them, being right next to them, hiking with them, spending that much time not on the run, not trying to do my day job while I'm carting them to practice. I realized still time, totally present time with them is more rare than it should be.
Do you plan on, or do you have a plan or ideas or practices that you intend to put into play now that you've had that kind of contrasting experience?
Perfect question. I certainly have prioritized it. Now, solving it all and taking an honest look. All right, we're about a month back into the regular fold. Mm-hmm. Am I more present? Am I back to being pretty distracted? And, there with them all the time, or not all the time, but a good bit of the time. But often wondering where I'm going and what's going next. I'm realizing that if it isn't something deliberate, it's going to fall by the wayside. That instincts are we go back to the same homeostasis we knew before. Which
right.
I don't think I was. Critical of myself as a parent sometimes. But I think That's
why I'm talking to you.
Exactly. Yeah. I think I know some things. I get some things right. I get some things wrong. But I really felt like I was where I was supposed to be this summer, and it felt great. It really felt great to. I ask 1,000 questions and it drives my kids nuts, and my wife's, you're never ever going to get all the answers you want but when you're with them for 10 hours, when you're on the road, you don't have to ask. It just sort of, comes out in the conversation. What do you want out of life? What do you, not necessarily those huge questions, but you start to get little glimpses.
But tell me more about what presence with your kids means to you. Like what's that practically look like? Like I'm present with my kids. What's that picture look like?
This, one of the things that I said this summer that was shocking to my kids would ask me for something that I'd have to go get out, check my cell phone and I was like, I don't have my cell phone. They looked at their jaw hit the ground. What do you mean you don't have your cell phone? I said, well, if there's an emergency at the church, I'm not the one they call because I'm on sabbatical. So so having my phone, if it's on my body, it's immaterial. That it isn't in my conscience. I'm not wondering if a message is coming in. Still enough that I'm not, one of the things, our weekends, because I work Sundays and often there's a wedding or there's some other thing going on, and I've got to get my sermon. The biggest, piece is looming over all weekend. So generally, most of the time that we have together is spent with me thinking about what's next or thinking about what else is on. And that was such a great thing to just, this is all I'm thinking about is this hike or being at the ball game with you guys. And, the phone pulls you to where, it can pull you halfway across the country. It can pull you, out of the dining room table. And, and we're trying to be intentional about the dining room table, but it pulls you out of the living room when you're watching something with the kids or playing a game with the kids. And I felt like nothing pulled me out of the room. I wasn't thinking about what's next. And so that's kind of what presence.
Yeah. It's funny how just being there doesn't mean you're present.
Yeah. Yeah. And the great thing, and your job's probably very similar in that you're in town, you can create your own schedule up to a certain degree. And so that you can be physically present a lot, but you know what paperwork has to be done to fill out all the things that you did during the day, and you know when contracts are due, and all those kind of things. And so, how do you take that gift, which is the physical presence of being able to be there, for things that other people who go into Northern Virginia and come back, gone for 11, 12 hours at a time, don't have. But how do you do it with a real presence? So.
Yeah. I want to ask you about your role as a leader, as a mentor, as a guide. What is one of the common familial problems or children developmental obstacles that you see most frequently? Without calling out anyone in particular, of course.
That is a tough question. You talked about helicopter parents, and I think I think this place cultivates this in some ways, in that it's a wonderful, bucolic, safe place to raise children, but it does sometimes create everything is about my child's experience, and I do think that a child needs to develop resiliency. I do think a child needs to fall a few times and struggle with school and figure out, all right, if I keep doing this, and expect it to be okay, and the teacher keeps saying it's not okay, then maybe I need to learn that important lesson. And I think I do think families are too concerned about that moment instead of the long arc of that child's development.
You put that beautifully. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I mean, as a parent, I'm impressed with my parents, whose first instinct was always, the teacher who is empowered and equipped, and might not be the favorite teacher, might not be the best teacher the school has to offer, but the teacher is prepared and equipped to help my child grow, and is part of the team that I'm on of helping my child grow. And and I'm thinking now we generally assume that we're the only ones that are equipped as parents. That it's us and our child, and everyone else is at times working for us, but I think the team concept of how we all work together to raise children is getting lost a little bit.
Yeah, it takes a village.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, and we have wonderful teachers, wonderful parents, but just as a culture, one of the things I've realized over both the time I've been a parent and the time I've been a priest is that there is a little bit less of that sense of we're all doing this together. We trust each other, and we're going to let our child fall. We're going to let our child be disappointed. We're going to let our child, think that they know better than us, but we're going to try to make sure that we work together to help that child grow. And
of course, a parent's, I think, natural intuition as soon as the kid falls is to run over and help them up. As soon as they get a bad grade, to blame the teacher. It's their fault. But I think, like you said, the long term, that's not the solution. It's the immediate fix, but it's not what makes your kid the resilient, stronger contributor. It's the opposite of that, I guess.
Yeah, and you can see the deeper you get into parenting, how strong that instinct to fix everything is, or to want your child not to be in the wrong in a particular situation, even if he is or she is. And to take that child's side. And I think we're called to advocate for our children, but but with enough judgment to say, I'm going to trust the situation as a whole. I'm going to trust the people I equip with for that work.
So I saw a comic. It was like a juxtaposition of the 50s and the 2000s, and it was a teacher and a parent on one side of a desk pointing their fingers at the kid, chastising them together. And then in the modern picture was the kid and the parent chastising the teacher together. Have you seen that comic?
I haven't, but it's. It is apropos, and there are times where I have to step back as a parent and just think, man, this C won't be the end of his, and maybe he's even right about whether or not he deserves that C or not, but he'll learn from it. If I use all the persuasion I have to make it disappear, he won't learn, the same
agree.
lesson,
Well, let me get into some kind of short answer type questions. Okay. It doesn't have to be short, but they're canned questions. Mm-hmm. How is the world that you grew up in? What's an advantage you had growing up that your kids now do not have?
I think I assumed everything was going to work out. I mean, all the way around. I mean, the
faith or confidence or
not even in that sense of just the Cold War was winding down. I mean, we weren't living in a getting under our desks for fallout drills the same way my parents might have been. There was a real optimism,
culturally,
and I assumed if I kept my nose clean and I studied hard, I'd be able to pick my college. There wasn't a sense that competition was so great that and it just wasn't a worry that wouldn't be a job for me. And I think the generation that's grown up post-school shootings, scarcity of job fears around the scarcity of jobs, the heightened competition for college spaces, and Elliot, I was very good in math Elliot's a year on track, a year ahead of where I was, just because we've been escalating, we've been and as a parent, this is sort of one of those things that I struggle with, well, if everyone else is doing that, putting them in this, is that for his benefit? I don't know, and I do think we start to create an environment where I don't think I spent a lot of time thinking about the person next to me is someone I might be competing with for a spot in college or a spot on a ball team, I just think we played sports because maybe I'm remembering it differently, but I feel like we played sports because it passed the time and it was fun. We studied hard because we wanted to do well, but I don't remember the anxiety or the stress around any of these things.
That's interesting. It's been 15 years. Mm-hmm. It's been 12, 13 years since I was in college, and I went to middle of the road college relative to like these Ivy League schools where people are like just brutal in competition. So that's an interesting observation. I hadn't thought about that. How about the flip side of that question? What's an advantage your kids have that you did not have?
I probably could add this to the to both lists, but my daughter hadn't seen a friend for a long time, and my wife says, "Oh, your friend was at the baseball, Elliot's baseball game." A sibling of and she knew exactly what was going on in that child's life. Oh yeah, I saw pictures of her, and whether you go to Warrenton or Taylor, you stay connected. And when things go south with social media, they can really go south. But they've got with texting for they've got 7 or 8 groups of friends that are all communicating with each other, and they go to a high school football game and they see folks they've played several sports with and they've kept in contact with because of social media. And I think it makes the community, a little bigger.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that does have both sides of that. I was listening to a YouTube video talking about bullying and how when you grew up, probably bullying was manifested in a form of, prolonged agitation or irritation by one or a group of people over days or weeks or months. And now like a microaggression is a form of bullying. Yeah. But when we went home,
it was done.
It was over. Yeah. But in the new normal now, you can't shut it off. Yeah. It's there all the time. Are you, even in 5th grade, or maybe even your kids at 12 and 14, did you have observation of that kind of stuff?
I didn't, but I'm acutely aware of how quickly it can, and I think probably, I don't mean to generalize too much, but, I feel like my son, it's just sort of, it's all just, touching base and for folks that don't communicate all that effectively in general, they can sort of in one line, keep connected. And I feel like he's got probably deeper friendships because of social media, just because it keeps him locked in. And whereas my daughter, I think, that I can see if any friend is on the outs that you can feel more isolated, more picked on. It can get deeper quicker. Overall, I think its potential pitfalls are pretty significant, but I have seen it create a sense of community. Or like my kids go to camp, and when I would leave, I told you I moved all the time, and that was it. That was but they still have some friends that they haven't seen in person until this summer in 7 or 8 years that they're friends with on social media, which they didn't even have back then when they moved. They can go to summer camp and still keep up with those friends all year round. And, when they see them next year, they know where they are in their lives. And so it works both ways. It definitely does.
It sure does. And of course, the good way, we don't have to do anything about. We want to cultivate that, fertilize it, throw all the chicken stuff on it,
exactly.
Make it awesome. And it'll be interesting to see how, because there's no hiding from it. There's no turning it off, the bad side. So I guess we're just going to have to figure out how to learn and how to teach people to manage it. And that's weird. I think about like a caveman 12-year-old kid or girl did a lot more than a 12-year-old now. So maybe they just have to be resilient and tougher sooner or something.
Yeah. It's good. And it's fascinating when you think of almost all the information that we absorbed came from some adult or another and was filtered through what adults, monitored and let us watch and see. I mean, the TV, when there was 1 or 2 TVs in the house, it was fairly, and they could determine what cable channels we could have and not have. Yeah. The internet was just coming into its own when I was leaving school, but most of the content that I think my kids, or my daughter, I should say, pays any attention to are kid generated. They're YouTube channels and, and folks, like this, that, they create their own, and so we didn't have much that was child produced for children, which is kind of an interesting difference.
Yeah, you had appointment television Saturday morning, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, what some adult thought we'd either be interested in, and they could market well too. Yeah,
that was adult created. Kids are now creating content. God, that's totally interesting. Let me see. There's just a billion different directions I could go, but I'll stay in the.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm throwing you left and right. That's
part of the fun of this. But can we talk about discipline a little bit? Like we talked about spanking and stuff a little bit, but like the goal, I guess, as a parent is to kind of steer your kid in a direction sometimes, or keep them away from stuff. Yeah. Like, do you have an opinion or recommendations?
I struggle because my kids' lives are overly programmed as it is, and I don't want to cause them additional stress or take away additional things that are carefree, so, but I also want them to grow and know there's accountability. And, my daughter doesn't have a cell phone. My son does. If you'd asked us 5 years ago how long we'd wait till they had cell phones, we would have said several more years. Yeah. And like I said, we didn't and haven't spanked or things like that. So and my kids, they really don't have time to play many video games anyway. And so sometimes we'll take away video games, and that works. But the cell phone, we realized about after a week, I was like, this is just a pain trying to get in touch with them, or But those generally are it, because I don't want to take away sports. I don't want to take away time with friends, because I don't feel like they have as much. I mean, I feel like we spend a lot of time just hanging out with our friends. They're running, and if they're not running in particular directions, their friends are running in particular directions. So there's not many days where everybody gets off the bus, goes, grabs a snack, and just spends the next 4 or 5 hours playing football in somebody's backyard or something like that. It's just a little different than it was then.
I'm so grateful to grow up playing a little football in the backyard.
Yeah. So I don't want to ground in the sense of, okay, you can't leave you can't go play for a couple of weeks. So, I take away things that I'm not all that happy with in the first place, like the video games and whatnot. But
it's funny that the world we live in is so different than the world our kids are growing up in. Like video games, when we were growing up, there wasn't anyone making millions of dollars as a professional gamer.
Isn't that crazy?
Now there are.
I mean, and they're teaching their classes and in competitions for it all, and it is pretty amazing.
One of the most attended live events, I think, was a professional Fortnite competition or something, and somewhere in I don't know which Asian country it was, but it was somewhere, and it had 70,000 people or something. I made that up, but
no. But that is another thing that that. Again, it's the mixed bag. But Elliot, for the short time that he got into Fortnite, I mean, he had some buddies that a buddy from his baseball team, a buddy from St. James, a buddy from Taylor, and they're all a community that would never ever probably run into each other in person. They're all I hear their voices coming through the video system, and think, hey, man. Wouldn't have put those 5 people together in any other context than that. So.
No, they are working together towards a common goal, or killing each other's avatars.
Exactly. Yeah. Whichever team they're on, whether they're on the same team or not. So, but it is interesting. I mean, it's just it is a different world, and I do think Warrenton. I will say it does provide a little bit more of what we had. Literally what you had since you grew up in here. But I watch. Folks at the Christmas parade, and I mean, and you could probably put it on top of the Christmas parade 30 years ago, and you probably have the exact same thing. Middle school boys and girls walking the sidewalks, looking for each other, and just enjoying being able to be free of adults. While the adults are at least in ear or eye shot. Yeah. Or you go to a Fuck Year high school football game, and it's probably the same experience it was 30 years ago. And Elliot does get on his bike and go across 8 or 9 neighborhoods to his friends' houses, and
that's so refreshing, because so many parents I talk to, it's like the fear mongering of the world has gotten to them. Yeah. I mean, I used to have a pocket full of quarters and ride my bike miles. Yeah. And not a whole lot of parents are willing to do that. Yeah. When's the last time you had a kid knock on your door and try to sell you wrapping paper?
I know. I mean, they've actually, the solicitations for the fundraisers for the middle school say, do not go door to door. Yeah.
Which is I feel like I don't know if it's appropriate or not, because I'm not that educated, but it's a shame. I know that, that we live in an environment where we feel right or wrong that that's not okay. Yeah.
It is a change. But I do feel like, on the flip side, I do think that Warrenton, is a little bit sheltered in some ways, and but I do think it does provide part of that sheltering. It provides at least the closest thing that I've seen to a childhood like it was 30 years ago, and there's something about that.
So, one of the examples I like to use is back in the day when parents would say something like, "Don't you dare listen to that Elvis Presley, he'll poison your mind," type of thing. Yeah. Can you think of anything that your parents forbid you from doing that ultimately felt pretty innocuous?
Actually, I don't know if it was innocuous as much as it wasn't as exciting as I thought it was. But I remember I was in 8th grade, and the local movie theater in Norfolk, Virginia, would play at around 11 o'clock at night, the Rocky Horror Picture Show. But they would also have all the characters acted out on stage, and people would bring squirt guns and they'd throw things, and they knew exactly what to do at every scene. And I remember thinking, this is going to be the coolest thing, and my parents were so resistant. I mean, I must have leveraged everything I had to get to go to this thing, and I remember being half asleep, thinking, I don't get it. It just wasn't. At 8th grade, I wasn't quite ready to fully.
Didn't sound like your parents got it either.
I don't think so, but they did let me go. Amazingly, they let me go, and I thought, I cashed in everything for this, and it wasn't quite worth it. So
is there anything that you look at that your kids are doing now that maybe is kind of the same?
That's a great. I'm always curious about what's the Grand Theft Auto and some of these video games, But and Elliot will talk to me tongue in cheek, and he's like, "What? Yeah, I had to give that guy a ton of money because I pulled his house over off the cliff because he was." I thought it wasn't really his house, but I thought it was someone else's house who was having an affair with my wife in this scenario. And I'm like, what? Yeah. And he's like, so I knocked over a jewelry store, and I was like, wait, but you're not vaping. I said, no. There's an article about vaping and what's going on right now with vaping. And I've been talking to him quite a bit about, that. And I was like, well, stick to your jewelry stores, no vaping. All right. He's sort of laughing, but I'm sort of like, well, I don't remember playing games where the scenario was that I was the jewelry thief trying to do X, Y, or Z. So it's
that concept fascinates me, that we, as much as parents will say, well, back when I was this age, or back when I was in college, and to think that directly applies, it's so easy to do when we're totally wrong. We're totally wrong. We can't relate to when I was 15, when your son being almost 15, I got no idea the world that he's living in. So is there anything that you do to keep yourself in check, or anything that you say to other people to say, hey, remember this?
Yeah. It's funny. I think I play a little bit even older than I am with Elliot. I intentionally called whatever his video machine, and he's sort of,
go get the beta tape out of the
exactly, and I just sort of, and we'll pretend to know anything relevant about social media or what's going on in the celebrity universe, but. I do try to. I think it's part of my lens as a preacher is always sort of thinking in continual terms of I've got to do that. What was it like 2,000 years ago, and what does that mean today? And so, so I'm always sort of trying to, in my mind at least, go back and think, okay, I wouldn't have been allowed to do that, but then again, I would have had the freedom to do this, and and what's the trade-off, and how much autonomy did I have over? I probably had a lot more autonomy over my life than Elliot or Laura has over theirs, and so So how much should I control the limited amount that they have?
Why do you think that is?
I just don't think I was as busy. I think. One, I didn't travel to Gainesville, or I didn't have multiple practices a week for any sports.
That's still a choice, right? Like, you don't make them play sports.
No, it's a choice, but it's it's just much more at this age. I feel like I could have played rec soccer until I was 18. I could have played rec baseball until I was 18, and maybe you can in Fairfax, but rec sports kind of go by the wayside by the time you get through middle school. They're either you're playing baseball, traveling all over Northern Virginia, or you've decided it's not my thing.
Yeah, there's not a lot of local.
Yeah, and so I didn't do anything that required me to go 30 minutes down the road to get to a practice that was 2.5 hours long that would get me back and start my homework at 9:00. And I played sports all the way through, but it was all in my own town. It was usually one until I got to high school practice. 2 practices a week at most. So
the options are almost overwhelming.
Yeah, and I sort of felt like in high school, if you wanted to play soccer, if you were coordinated enough and you played a few years of soccer growing up, you were going to make the team, and you might not be the star of the team, but you'd get some playing time, and you'd get the varsity letter, and you'd feel like you were still part of the team. And now I sort of feel like they've created a environment where if you haven't been dedicating yourself to this craft for years, you retire by 13.
They're like feeder programs now. They're not recreational. They are intended to go a direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I do think they have less autonomy. Yes, they could opt out of the whole in a soccer or baseball thing, and but I think their schedules get filled between that and school. I had a lot more just, like I said, drop my backpack off and what are we doing today, guys? You know,
get on the bike and go wherever.
Yeah. So.
Well, I'll jump into some kind of I'll call them rapid fire. They don't have to be rapid, but so what is the greatest hope that you have for your children?
You know, as generic as it is, that they be happy. You know, I mean, I obviously have a whole lot of, you know, I want them to do well in school, and we'd all pick profession A over profession B, but that generally they're happy, that they enjoy life and find somebody that they love and really have everything that feeds them, and you know, and that they be good people.
What do you feel like is the role of a father?
I think it's a lot like, I think it's very much like I was talking about at the school, you know, that little probably comes from anything that I've ever told them. They probably were rolling their eyes before they were doing it as deliberately as they do in middle school now. And but I'd like to think that they watch me pretty closely and how I treat their mom, how I treat their friends, how I listen to them, the choices I make, and that will be what has the lasting influence.
What's one of the better pieces of advice that you've gotten in as far as being a parent?
You know, I think my dad once told me, and it was not when I was a parent, he said, you know, I got plenty of friends. You know, he said, I didn't bring you in the world because I needed another friend. You know, he said, I brought you into this world to help you grow and to be the best person that you can be. And there are going to be times where it's pretty obvious that I'm not your best friend. And I thought, you know, I want my kids to love me. I want my kids to want to be around me and want to do things with me. But at the end of the day, that's not why I'm a father.
What are 2 or 3 characteristics that a super dad would have?
Enough confidence that that they don't need their kids' success to validate them. You know, I think that sense of wholeness that's in themselves. A kindness. I mean, just an approachability that, you know, that even if you're, you know, as you can be as strict as you need to be to help them grow, but they know when things get messy that they can come to you and that they can tell you things that are going to crush you, but that you're going to listen and you're going to give them what they need, you know, and values. I mean, I think a sense of integrity and if you tell them to tell the truth and they see you looking for every corner to cut, you know, that you have enough integrity that even if they don't listen to a word that you say, they can watch you and learn that.
That's been one of my most one of the best things anyone told me was to just always be truthful, because then they can rely on you.
Yeah.
Right or wrong, they know you always told the truth.
Absolutely.
And you meant it.
Yeah.
So, if you were to write a book as your life as a parent, what would be the name of a couple chapters?
Oh man, that's parenting is much easier when you realize you're not cool. You know, I mean, that's it. I think one, you're more fun when you're just being yourself and you're a goofball. I think I learned that from being a youth leader. You know, when I was in my early 20s, I might have had at least a little bit of that street cred to be the cool young adult, but that doesn't last very long. And you're better off to own who you are than it is to,
That's the best. That's the best one I've heard, I think.
Yeah. But I think I learned that from being a youth leader, but it works as a parent. I'm a much better goofball, embarrassing dad than I am cool trying to look like I'm their age. The big learning that I'm still working on is just being there isn't being present, and making sure I'm clear about which one I am.
I'm going to shoot from the hip a little bit and ask a new question. What do you think is the role of self-development in being a parent?
I mean, I think it's always big. I mean, just as a silly and kind of superficial example, the kids are finally getting to this age in sports where coaches have expectations of them, and and I'm feeling like if I haven't gotten off the couch in months, and I'm not willing to go out and do stuff with them, then what can I expect of them? Or what kind of credibility do I have? Or so I taught myself how to juggle a soccer ball. I played soccer growing up, but never was any good at juggling. But Laura Lee's coach, that was their, this summer you're going to work on that, and so I figure, I'll teach myself how to do it, so that when I ask her, have you practiced your juggling, I can say it with some integrity, and I think, and that's a superficial answer, but I do think that if they see us always trying to grow, do your homework, get good grades, all those things we say or impart on them, if they don't see us trying to be better selves, how much integrity does what we say to them have? That's
a wonderful example. The book that I'm reading, the author I listen to frequently, and he referenced Mahatma Gandhi. A parent brought their kid to him and said, "Tell my kid to quit eating sugar." And Gandhi said, "Come back in a month." And so in a month, he brought the kid back, and Gandhi said, "Quit eating sugar." And the parent said, "Why didn't you tell him that a month ago?" And Gandhi said, "I needed to see if I could do it."
Wow.
So I thought that was pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
It's just like you're juggling. Yeah. Like you have no reason to juggle a soccer ball with exception to being an example to your parent, as a parent. I think that's awesome. Yeah.
I think it probably just frustrated my daughter, but at least I could say with some integrity, all right, let's go.
Yeah. No, I think you may have just inspired me to do whatever it is my kids are doing. If it's ballet, I'm going to go be the best ballet person I can be, and just to be the example.
Well, good.
So, do you have a favorite television dad, TV dad?
The dad from Wonder Years was always, do you ever watch Wonder Years?
It was on the edge of my generation.
We skip it. It's worth going back and watching it. So, but he's just kind of our curmudgeon-y dad, but it's such a perfect throwback show. I mean, it goes well past my childhood, but it was almost the exact same. When I was watching it, it was my dad's childhood. While he lamented how much it changed growing up while I was a child. And so now that it's two generations, it's kind of...
it's context.
Yeah, it is.
One of my favorite questions I stole from Tim Ferriss. It's the billboard question.
All right.
You're on 95 and you got a billboard, and you got to give a piece of advice to all the dads driving by, and it has to fit on the billboard.
All right. Never make them wonder if you love them.
That's great. Yeah. If time, money, space was no object, and you got to give a gift to every father on the planet, what gift might that be?
I told you about my recent... I'd give 5 weeks of paid vacation and the resources to take their family cross country, as many days as you can make it through in a tent. I mean, that was the best gift I've ever been given. And, St. James, I will be forever indebted for creating that space for me, and for Anna's work for being able to get her the time off. But 5 years, Elliot will be in college, and not much longer, my daughter will as well, and rest of time we'll always have.
When into your life do you feel the most love?
I've been pretty lucky that I work at a job where people frequently affirm me or do things to make me realize that they don't take me for granted, and I've got kids who think I'm a good person, which is nice. I mean, at the end of the day, there's probably not a better thing, but they think that if they ended up like me, that would be an admirable pursuit, which I think that's the way. And then they show it in different ways. It was kind of neat the way Dad, just because you do that doesn't mean everyone else does. You're always doing. But I just I think that the fact that they think I'm somebody with integrity or somebody with exemplary character, that means a lot to me.
Yeah. And I don't want you to cheat off your last answer, but this question is, what kind of father would you like to be remembered as?
A lot more present. I'd like to be remembered as the kind of dad that both kids knew they could always come to, and they were never in too big a hole or made too big a mistake or were crashing too hard that they couldn't come to me and say, I'm falling on my face here, Dad. Yeah. That they wouldn't be worried that I would anything, shame, anger, any of that would be my leading. That I would know that they just need to be held and loved, and that billboard. Never worry that I don't love you with everything I got. So,
and this will be my last question for you. In the event that this recording, our conversation, get to last forever, and you had an opportunity to give a message to every Maas child that would survive generations, what kind of message would that be?
It's an interesting one because I've never lived in the same place as the generations that have gone before me, and so I've never gotten that lecture from you wear the Maas name wherever you go. But I think I hope great grandchildren down the road realize that all your great grandfather asks of you is that you take good care of one another and that you lead a meaningful life, and don't worry about class rank or paychecks. Just live a fulfilling and meaningful life and take good care of one another along the way.
Father Ben Maas.
Thank you. Thanks for this. It made it much easier than I thought.